This is a true story from a $15 billion U.S. victim company that was hit with a $28.7875 million ransom demand in January 2021. And it starts with this: your network has been locked. You need to pay 30 million US dollars now. After a few rounds of negotiating, the victim company countered with the $2.25 million offer. And here's what their response was. It's very funny to watch a few of your admins trying to install MS Exchange server in 3 days, but you can't do it. So I always find that interesting. Little side note: the hackers, the ransomware criminals, often know better than you do what it's costing you to be down. I mean, I think the browser threats, I think all of the different threats are involving. Somebody was said, all vulnerabilities, it's like, it's getting to the point where the lag time between having a vulnerability and having an exploitation, and it's going from weeks or months to days and hours. It may get to seconds at some point. I was the guy who was against Wi-Fi. And a lot of people hear the story and they laugh at me because they're like, what do you mean you were against Wi-Fi? Everybody has Wi-Fi. In the middle of this government meeting, Terry literally told everybody to get up and leave. I'm just going to talk to Dan. I'm giving you 1 week to figure this out, or I want your resignation.
Very few people have had a front row seat for American cybersecurity like Dan, sitting right in front of me here. He started at NSA, became the nation's first white state CISO in Michigan, advised the White House and Department of Homeland Security, and today serves as a field CISO for public sector at Presidio. He is also a writer. That's something that we're going to dive deeper into to learn more of the stories that he included in his book called Cyber Mayday and the Day After. So I'm super excited to hear about it. Dan, thanks so much for joining Be Fearless podcast. I'd love to know how you got into cyber. I know that you started in 1980s when cybersecurity wasn't really a thing. So how did you learn about this and what led you there eventually?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on Be Fearless podcast, and it's really an honor to be with you. So, yeah, I mean, in the early 80s, I was going to school in Valparaiso, Indiana. And my brother, who was a computer sales guy, was doing really well. Salesman of the year for like 10 companies, which is a whole nother discussion. But he said, get into computers, get into, learn about computer science because it's going to be really hot. And so it was kind of what was the real hot topic in the early 80s. And so I got my degree in computer science at Valparaiso, and then I got a job offer at the National Security Agency, NSA in Washington. It was back then we couldn't even say that. You would say U.S. Department of Defense, Fort Meade, Maryland. But now you can say that publicly. But it was a great way to start my career. We didn't talk about cybersecurity back then. It was information security, or information assurance was another name that people used. And it was, learning about networking and learning about, I won't go into the details of what we did, but had the chance to travel the world a little bit. Then went on to work with Lockheed and Mantech in England in the 90s, also in the intelligence community. And so really that first few, 15 years of my career, actually 13 years of my career was in the intelligence community, and able to learn about networking. And we're going from Ethernet to FIDI fiber networks, and everything was getting faster, and hadn't quite hit the dot-com bubble yet. So it was a great way to start my career, and learned a ton. And the culture of NSA was a great way to start. Is learning, some of their mottos: security is our middle name. Everything we do is security. And then, just wrapping around global networking and technology. Just one quick little tidbit. I mean, early job was like, computers all talk different languages even back in then. So IBM networking didn't really talk to, TCP/IP or ISO/IP in Europe. internet protocol. So we had to do translators to even send emails from one computer to another. And so the IBM computers didn't talk to the DEC computers, didn't talk to the Sun computers. So a lot of translation work, a lot of just getting things to talk to each other and communicate. And it was a great way to start a career.
Yeah, wow. It looks like so many stops and so many transitions that you went through. What would you say was your most memorable stint? Were there any particular defining moments?
Yeah, I was kind of give you some good and bad. Some good stories. I think I remember most 2008. That year I was CISO of the year for SE Magazine, which is a big magazine in the USA at the time. It was probably the biggest security magazine. Public Official of the Year for Governing Magazine. Computer World 100 top IT official in the globe. So I won a lot of awards. My first book came out. I'll hold this up: Virtual Integrity: Faithfully Navigating the Brave New Web, which was a big deal. Publishing, I published. Last one was co-published with Shemaine Tam, but 3 books. That was a real big highlight. So during that, say, 3-year span, I went from CISO role to CTO role in Michigan, Chief Technology Officer, and then back to the CSO role in Michigan from 11 to 14 under Governor Rick Snyder. But during that time, why was it memorable? I mean, obviously a lot of accolades, but more than the awards, putting together a team, we did a lot of firsts that at the time nobody was doing. Governor Rick Snyder came from Gateway Computers. He was the CEO of Gateway. He then, was really into cybersecurity, which was not big in 2011, 2012. So we built the Michigan Cyber Disruption Strategy, preparing for things like ransomware attacks and data breaches. And no other state in the country had a disruption strategy for cybersecurity, but now they all have them, right? But Michigan Cyber Range, we were the first non-classified cyber range in the country. Now everybody does cyber ranges. We built a Michigan Cyber Civilian Corps, which is like I call it a volunteer fire department for cybersecurity. So when emergencies happened, teams could go out and help counties and cities recover from ransomware attacks and do different things and prepare for if a major attack hit the state. So a lot of groundbreaking work that we did was really exciting. We'll talk about the teams in a few minutes, but I know we got a lot of questions to get through, but I do want to tell one story right out of the gate, because it wasn't all awards and winning. I remember back in 2004, 4 years prior to that, I almost got fired as a CISO. I was the guy who was against Wi-Fi. And a lot of people hear the story and they laugh at me because they're like, what do you mean you were against Wi-Fi? Everybody has Wi-Fi. Well, back then, Wi-Fi was the cutting edge issue, right? It was an issue where, all the papers from NSA, CIA, DIA, FBI said, don't do Wi-Fi. It's not secure. And yet, and there were headlines in the local news, Home Depot and Lowe's were getting hacked. People were sitting in the parking lot hacking cash registers because Wi-Fi was not secure and taking credit card numbers. So I was against it. My boss said, Dan, we want to put Wi-Fi securely in all of our state conference rooms. And I said, in the middle of a big staff meeting, Terry, I'm canceling this project. We're not doing Wi-Fi. And right in the middle of this government meeting, Terry literally told everybody to get up and leave. I'm just going to talk to Dan. And so I was shocked, I was terrified. She comes down and says, Dan, if that's your answer, you can't be the CSO in Michigan. And I'm like, well, Terry, let me explain why I'm saying this. This is, and she's like, no, stop. She said, we know you're smart. You got a master's from Johns Hopkins. You're a great guy, but I've been to Dow, Ford, Chrysler, and GM. And they all have Wi-Fi in their conference rooms. What do they know that you don't know? I'm giving you 1 week to figure this out, or I want your resignation. And so I almost got fired. I mean, this was a defining moment for me on the negative side, right? So at the end of the story, we did do Wi-Fi. We rolled it out. We put together a plan. 2 years later, we win the award in the country for the best Wi-Fi security in all 50 states. But I tell that story for this reason for the audience. After Wi-Fi came cloud computing. After cloud computing, Internet of Things. After Internet of Things, now we have AI. And CISOs are known for saying no. It's like the answer is no. What is the question? You can't do that. It's bad. You can't do that. And so I had to learn that was a defining moment for me. Was I learned that I had to get to yes. I had to get to yes and do something, do security on time, on budget with the right level of security. So that was a real defining moment for me. My boss is now a friend, still a friend 20 years later. And, but I almost got fired. And I learned that it applies to every technology. Security pros got to get to yes.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful story because this story literally can be replicated in any era you in the past, in the future. I think this is a great lesson for anyone who's looking to implement new technologies, and especially today with emergence of AI
Yep.
browsers, which is a big, big topic today.
Yeah.
But before we jump into that, I want to learn more about when you advised everyone starting from White House to local governments, what makes securing the public sector fundamentally different from the private sector, and why those differences matter for any CISO who's thinking, okay, which direction should I go and what kind of things should they take into consideration?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for public sector, roles, and I don't think it's one or the other. I've done both, and I think you can go back and forth. But there are a lot of similarities. I think the similarities are somewhat obvious, but a lot of differences. So I'll just give you three core differences. I think the politics of it do come into play. Meaning I'm not Democrat Republican politics. I'm not saying left right politics, but you have election cycles, so you've got a timeline. Some your boss or the governor or the mayor or the president, if it's White House, gets elected for a period of time, and they've got a timeline to get something done. They have budget cycles that are very tight, and so you end up saying, you get an appropriation for a period of time, and you have to get something done. On the flip side of that, with budgets, I've seen where no money, no money, no money, and then one of the crazy things about, like, when I was in Michigan State government, the last week of the fiscal year, they would come in and they would say, "Okay, Dan, we have no money, no money, no money for months." And like you got 1 week to spend $1 million. I mean, and so it's like, because the money was like we call use or lose money. So the money would be like, if you not only would you lose the $1 million if you didn't spend it, but then they take that out of your budget for the next 12 months. So then you would lower your budget if you didn't spend it. So it was crazy how that would happen. So what's the moral of the story? I always have a list ready to go. Always have a list of projects, important priorities, and I kept it in my drawer, and I'd pull it out when they, no money, no money, no money. Now I got to spend it. But with the elections, and there really are concentric circles in government, regardless of Democrat, Republican, not saying bipartisan here. I remember a funny story, true story. Somebody said along the way back when Governor Engel, I first became CISO, before I became CISO, actually, I was in government. I was in Michigan, and people were asked, I was at a Christmas party, and somebody said, "Were you in the bus with Governor Engler?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm on the bus," And then somebody pulled me aside and said, "Dan, you were not on the bus." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" It's like, I thought they meant like on the bus, like, are you with the program? Are you for us? Are you positive? And then what they really meant was literally on the campaign bus when they were going around campaigning. Because the interesting thing about this is this is the lesson. The people that are, and it's somewhat true in the private sector, but not nearly as much as in the public sector. The people who are most trusted are the ones that were with you when you got elected. They were there when we didn't know if we were going to win or not. We won 51-49. And because, right, you could be a really smart person who has great ideas, but how do I know you're not looking for my opponents? How do I know that you're not working for the bad guys, right? Kind of the insider threat almost thing. And so, the idea that, the people that inner circle are the people that were with them during the campaigning, and that's different. So I typically was not in that. I didn't campaign with these different elected leaders from either party, Democrat and Republican. I would try and be in that middle circle of people who were then brought in, who were trusted. But that deeper trust is only with those elected officials. And then the last thing I would just say real quickly is sense of public service. I mean, you can't make as much money, but you are doing public good and you really are helping. And there's really a sense in the public sector of really doing well for society and culture and really helping your community in a way that you don't have that same level of buy-in many cases I think, in the private sector, which is more money focused. Now, of course, there's money focused in the public sector as well, but those are just a couple examples. I've done blogs on this. There are probably 7 or 8 other things I could say, but those are just a few of the differences.
Yeah, those are all amazing stories. And being the first ever CISO of Michigan, how difficult it was in the early days with having no predecessors, where you didn't have to someone to look back at and think, okay, this is something that I can follow. You literally had to do everything from scratch. How was the experience? And let's say someone is looking to becoming a first ever CISO at any organization, what are some of the things that they have to consider in the first place?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. When I joined Michigan government in '97, I was a CIO for management and budget, and the whole focus was Y2K. It was like I didn't know if I was ever going to go back to security again. But I got to know the thing. Relationships are so important, and I got to know the CIOs of all the other 20 agencies. We all worked on Y2K year 2000. Mostly COBOL, programming issues. Mainly, there was some security, but not much. It was really around building websites back in the late 90s and Y2K compliance. But I built the relationships, and there was a trust there. And then government after eMichigan, we built Michigan.gov, kind of online but not inline, campground reservations and paying your taxes online, and we did all that. Then 9/11 hit, and 9/11 kind of woke the world up to not just obviously the physical security because of what happened in New York and Washington, but also the importance of securing our online assets, and so there was a real importance. And at the same time, Michigan centralized all of our IT. So we went from 20 different agencies with 20 different, all different data centers, all different teams doing 20 different people doing Oracle, 20 different groups doing Microsoft. Now we had, centralized all these functions, and we created the first CISO for the state of Michigan in '02. And so, the buy-in was there. I had the relationships, which was a huge help for me. But as far as like what we were going to do, I just come from the eMichigan office, building Michigan.gov. As I mentioned, I was a CTO for that, and we had a lot of guidance from like NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. We had people telling us Department of Homeland Security was being stood up. We had a lot of checklists and a lot of technical information, which is available today to leaders. AI can help you. You have all these different standards and compliance. We had, payment card industry, PCI compliance, CJIS, criminal justice compliance, all these different data compliance issues. But it was really mainly about being someone who was a trusted leader and built a team of people. That's what I say is the most important thing is surrounding yourself with almost like a football team. I use a lot of sports analogies. You got to have the right mix of people around you, not being afraid of having people even smarter than you. There were a lot of people smarter than me that worked for me, but they were good at what they did, and I trusted them, and people you trust. So it was unique. We were the first in all 50 state governments to have a CISO. I was the first, and first in Michigan, of course. There were others in the federal government that were ahead of us in the private sector. So finding a mentor, finding people that you can, who have been through it before in your industry is a big help. I encourage you to do that. Be a part of organizations and partnering with public and private sector are some tips that can help you. But we had to build a plan and then run it through management. And the good news was nobody wanted to be hacked. So we had a lot of support from governors, both Republicans and Democrats, for what we were doing.
Yeah, yeah. And to what extent do you think having those adjacent roles that you were mentioning, being a CTO and CIO, were helpful in your career before you actually jumped into the CISO role?
Well, they were very, very, very important. I mean, I think, everyone's journey is a little bit different. Some people come from technical backgrounds, some come from a business background. I know a good friend of mine who just got his MBA, who's now a CISO, who was a CTO. So people come from different, there's kind of, I don't think there's any one right or wrong door to get into this, become the CISO of an organization. But I think you need to know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. Leaders, I love the football line. Tim Tebow's like, leaders are somebody who people want to follow. And so being the kind of person who cares about, your staff, really care about their family, really, I mean, obviously you've got to be competent. You've got to be someone who knows basic knowledge around government, basic knowledge. But I understood how government ran. I understood we were reinventing a lot of things, and a lot of, people, process, and technology was changing so rapidly, which it still is today, by the way. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. I had a very good base understanding for a good, 4 or 5 years before I became the CISO in Michigan. So, and I understood, I had some people who mentored me. I understood the budget process. I understood who the good people were, and going out and getting really good people that could be on my team. So yeah, I mean, all that really helped.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a big topic also for governments is a lot of governments are getting targeted by ransomware,
Yeah.
yet they so often have to operate with limited budget and legacy systems. How should public sector CISOs prioritize when everything feels urgent?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. I mean, I think it starts with getting a good understanding of the business priorities of your government and of your organization. If you're in the private sector and listening to this, having a good understanding of the business, having a good understanding of what the goals are. I tell people, look, if the business goes bankrupt, you don't need cybersecurity. So you got to make sure that you got to make sure that that you understand how things work. Relationships are so key. I can't, if you hear that word from me 50 times, it's probably not enough. And I think, we go get into building a plan. There's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of roadmaps, getting a mentor, as I mentioned earlier. But, as a CISO, there's a lot of competing priorities, and there's so many things to do. But relationships down, your staff, your peers, management, the clients, customers, and then also the vendor community, all those are important. And the same thing is during a ransomware attack or an incident. So, most organizations now, going on, I'm talking about the early days, we didn't have a lot of those plans and strategies in place 20 years ago. Now, most organizations do have, at a very basic level, they've got an incident response plan. But if your organization doesn't, I mean, starting off, you've got to do a risk assessment. Where are you at? What are you good at? What are you not good at? Lots of organizations can come in from the outside. Probably some organizations that are listening to this have it with inside, your own auditors who can tell you where your strengths and weaknesses are. But looking at the full NIST cybersecurity framework, and looking through the list of different aspects, and maybe you're good at incident response, but you're not good at, vulnerability management, or you're not good at identity management. So looking at the strengths and weaknesses of that, looking at your audit findings. A lot of CISOs come into a position and they have audit findings. With ransomware, especially, which is we're going to talk more about in a few minutes with a story, but making sure that when you have that plan, you make sure it includes all aspects of the organization, not just the technical aspects. The lawyers are certainly going to be involved. The business areas, all the different parts of the organization, and then practice, tabletop exercises, practice, just like a good sports team, football team. You've got to practice, because practice makes perfect. And learn from others that have been through incidents. Go out and visit other organizations, see how they responded, and where you can go for help if you're not ready. So for those small cities and counties, may not have the resources. A lot of times the states will chip in and help, or the FBI, or state police. Others in your community will help you in those situations.
Yeah. And what was the story that you wanted to tell about ransomware?
Yeah, no, I thought I'd jump right in. And people, again, this is the book Cyber Mayday and the Day After. It's a leader's guide to preparing, managing, and recovering from inevitable business disruption. I co-authored this with Shemaine Tan, who is in Singapore, and she was in Australia. Wonderful leader. She's done a lot of TED Talks. Encourage you to interview her as well. She's wonderful. But she's got a lot of experience as well. And this story is a true story that happened. I'm just going to read a little part of it. I don't really read much on these interviews, but it kind of tells the story better. This is a true story from a $15 billion U.S. victim company that was hit with a $28.75 million ransom demand in January 2021. And it starts with this: your network has been locked. You need to pay 30 million US dollars now. After a few rounds of negotiating, the victim company countered with a $2.25 million offer, which was, responded to with a scornful response by the ransomware criminals. And here's what their response was: it's very funny to watch a few of your admins trying to install MS Exchange server in 3 days, but you can't do it. We have encrypted 5,000 of your 6,000 servers. If we do some very simple calculations, your expenditure is like $50 per hour, or maybe even more generous, $65 per hour. So in 24 hours spent to restore one server multiplied by the number of servers that we've encrypted on your network, that's $10 million just in labor expenditure alone. So I always find that interesting. Little side note: the hackers, the ransomware criminals often know better than you do what it's costing you to be down, what the business cost is, what the impact is. They've done their homework. They think through this. Oftentimes they're dwelling in your networks before you even get hit, and they know that. But I digress here real quickly. They continue: don't forget that you spent all this time on installation. Oops, you can't even restore any data because it's gone for the next 1,000 years. This is funny. They added time factor in at the end of the message, but they also showed some mercy at the same time. The timer's ticking. In the next 8 hours, your price tag will go up to $60 million. So they threatened to raise the price. So either you take our generous offer, pay $28.75 million, or invest in quantum computing to expedite the decryption process, which is, again, a little humor there. When the company asked for additional time, the crooks countered by writing back: I don't think so. You aren't poor and you aren't children. If you're effed up, you have to meet the consequences now. A day later, the company finally managed to get authority to go to $4.75 million. The extortions agreed to lower their demand to $12 million on the condition that the remaining amount be paid within 72 hours. They went back and forth. I'll jump to the end. At the end, the hackers agreed the following things after the victim company paid an $11 million ransom. The hackers would not launch any new attacks. The company would get the tool to fully decrypt the encrypted data. The hackers would completely leave the network and never target them again. But remember who you're dealing with here, right? The hackers would give the company access to the data to delete it themselves. The data would never be published or resold. And this is my favorite one. The hackers provided a full report on all their actions, how they got into the network, how the attack was carried out, tips on how to improve security, and how to have a better security awareness training program. And so they basically provided all that. They ended up paying an $11 million ransom. So there's a lot of stories in the book. It's a shock to everybody when it happens. They think they're ready, but they're not, and it's devastating. It's devastating for organizations.
Yeah. Well, those were pretty nice hackers. If they, provided a whole report how the attack got executed, they were pretty nice, pretty gentlemen of them.
I mean, this was 4 years ago too, so things have evolved a little bit. But and the other thing is, can you trust? We'll never come back in again. I mean, certainly there are stories in the UK and others where they hacked the network, they paid the ransom. The people then went on vacation because they'd been through so much trouble. And they came back 2 weeks later and everything was still vulnerable. They hadn't changed anything. And so they did the same thing again. They did it a second time because they hadn't really done all the steps they should take to protect themselves after they had been through a ransomware attack.
Wow. There are a lot of lessons in the story for everyone to learn if they ever have to face this.
Yeah, when the book, I encourage you to read the book. It's still relevant. It was published a few years back, but checklists, a lot of who to call, a lot of true stories. There's so many checklists. There's so many free resources on ransomware, and encourage you to go to those. And they're mentioned in the book and other places. A lot of great websites on ransomware techniques and tips and tricks and things you can do, and good best practices. But it's really important to really have the stories with it, because it has an emotional impact. The people, we've seen again and again and again organizations that are hit with a breach and those who haven't, and the focus, the determination, the seriousness of the team is often radically different after someone's been hit with a ransomware.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the emotional side of things, it's you can never skip it, because this is so integral part into being a CISO. If you aren't stress resistant, it's so hard to even consider going into that job. So
Yeah.
this is probably should be something at the top job description, whoever signs up to be a CISO. But I want to talk then more about emerging threats, and you started mentioning that um, if if you want to buy products, if you're a CISO, you also have to ensure that business operates well. So I heard somewhere this ratio that for every dollar spent today on AI, you have to spend around 20 cents on securing AI. What's your take on this? Do you think in a similar manner, or you think there should be a better ratio to it?
No, I think that sounds. I mean, I don't know where exactly where that number came up, but that sounds about right. I mean, it's been a battle over the last several decades. I remember in Michigan when we were spending 1% of our IT budget on security, and it was a big win to get to 2%. And then we found out all the banks were spending 15% of their money on. And one of the things that's very hard in all of these numbers, quite frankly, is, um, you know, honestly, how do you do the math? Like, what's included and what's not included? Is system administration security, or is it not security? Most people would say identity management and vulnerability management and the salaries of the security team. That's clearly security. But there's so many other aspects of AI and other technologies that are really fall under, security and privacy and protection of data and encryption and so many things. So basically what I'm trying to say is, the old cliche, numbers don't lie, but metrics don't lie, but, numbers don't lie, but liars, I can't remember that. How to say it. I'll think of it in a second. Figures don't lie, but liars figure. That's it. I'm sorry. I couldn't remember that line. Basically, how do you come up with the numbers? And where, but yeah, 20 cents for security. I mean, looking at the list, we talk about, I do a look at the top industry reports every year. And it's not, these aren't my predictions. I've been doing this since 2014. I've been blogging since about 06. And I write for several magazines. But this report that I put out, maybe we could put a link to it for people. The top 26 security predictions for 2026, and then part 1 and part 2. And what I do is I look at all the industry top reports, not the individual predictions, but looking across the industry at the threats, at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, the rise of agentic attacks is number one. I mean, it's across all the reports. AI agents will execute multi-step operations, interact with real systems, turning compromised agents into powerful, independent attack vectors. Another one, AI-powered social engineering. Deepfakes are, across the board hitting us. AI will revolutionize business email compromise and extortion scams. This is becoming automated. The shift to post-quantum security. Ransomware becomes fully automated. AI insider threats. Autonomous AI agents with privileged access will become the new insiders, requiring specific AI firewalls to prevent them from becoming vulnerabilities. So all of these, I think 7 of the 10 top trends revolve around AI. So, AI is showing up in all aspects of our business. So yeah, 20 cents on security. Hopefully they're building security into the AI products that you're rolling them out. But that seems actually, it may even end up being a low number. Security has got to be built in as you roll out all of your AI projects.
Yeah, yeah. I think what's happening right now, as with many emerging technologies, is that there's so much excitement to get the early versions out as soon as possible, that this frequently becomes the point that doesn't get baked in. But with all the recent reports being posted, I think that's the mistake that a lot of companies realize. And start to take it a lot more seriously as we go into 2026. If you could give one or two pieces of advice to CISOs that are looking into these threats as we go into 2026, what would you tell them to think differently?
Yeah, well, one thing that one prediction, and probably my favorite, I always am surprised by, I spend most of the month of December reading these reports and then write up these articles. And, there's a lot of great reports and a ton of great information. So I would, number one, said, take time. This isn't my material. These are all the top vendors. We've summarized them here. We put links to the real reports. We want people to go read the reports. It's worth doing the homework because you learn so much and there are so many stories. So do the homework, learn about the current threat environment, learn about these, read the reports, but also flip it. This is the counterintuitive thing. One of my favorite predictions was from Gartner saying AI is making us lazy. And I found that to be fascinating. They're saying like 50% by the end of this year, they're predicting that in late 26, 27, new job hires, new roles as you get a new position will require interviews in person with no AI. I mean, basically, almost like, you can't use your calculator in the old days when I was growing up. You got to do the math. You got to, no AI, no technology. People, can you think on your own? Can you think independently? So I think it's both are true. I mean, AI is an integral part. I put as the big trend in 2025. We've crossed the Rubicon, or the point of no return. I really do believe our attacks are coming at us faster. We need AI to respond. Our security operations centers are more and more being run by AI. So it's not like um, we cannot dismiss ourselves from this, but we also need to be able to think independently, think and check, because there still are hallucinations, there still are mistakes being made, and we need that expertise now more than ever, in my opinion, of leaders who can really think about how we can holistically secure that whole the agents and the new technologies that are being rolled out in our businesses.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And since a lot of these AI technologies sit in the browser, we saw emergence of a lot of AI browsers, malicious extensions that are AI powered. Now that we're in 2026, how do you think the browser threatscape will continue to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think the browser threats. Um, I think all of the different threats are involving. Somebody was said, all vulnerabilities. It's like it's getting to the point where the lag time between having a vulnerability and having an exploitation, and it's going from weeks or months to days and hours. It may get to seconds at some point. I mean, people scanning your system, browser-based vulnerabilities, but also any vulnerabilities in your systems. I think it's becoming much more sophisticated. But the ability to use cookies, use all kinds of different traditional uh, technologies, and exploit them, and if you're running an older version, you're vulnerable in some way. That gap is just shrinking to almost nothing. So I see the whole vulnerability management response. It's becoming in 2026, if it hasn't already gotten there in 25, it's becoming a due diligence issue. Why was this not patched? Why was this not updated? Why did you not run the latest versions? And then even then, the 0 days still being very, very devastating. So I just see it's faster and more impactful than ever before.
Yeah, yeah. And moving to the internal part, I know that we talked about the external threats, but on the internal side, also a lot of people in the government are excited to use AI tools. How do you see they're going to balance productivity with preventing data leakage, with so much sensitive government data being used?
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. I mean, I think I do see new technologies. It's like an arms race. New technologies like confidential computing and other types of things being used to make sure that the data that you are using is protected and is secure. I mean, more and more organizations are, and you see that in a lot of these reports for 2026. Um, the shadow AI challenge. More and more people, your company says, well, we're not going to pay. We'll pay for this, but we're not going to pay for that new tool, or and people are just taking it into their own hands. We've had um, this issue has been around for more than a decade in cloud computing. We call it rogue cloud resources. I remember literally, and the funny story, people like to hear stories going back 15 years. True story. We had an individual in Michigan government back in the 2010 timeframe, and an organization didn't want to pay for our enterprise service to back up all of their laptops. And we went in there, and long story short, it was a meeting, and they're like, "You're charging us too much." And like, well, what are you using? We're using this free service that we online. I'm like, really? What's this free service? It's freechinainternetbackup.com. And it was like, yeah, they're backing up your data, but I don't know what else they're doing with it. And so, I mean, literally, they were taking matters into their own hands. And so we had, a decade ago, people heard the term CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers, where we'd have to put this in between and say, you can use these cloud services, but you can't use these cloud services. The same kind of thing is happening in AI today. So, like, what's allowed, what's not allowed, the free tools that are out there, more and more tools coming out all the time that are very, very powerful and can be very impactful to the business areas. But if they're not properly set up, or they're on the commercial internet, they're not, they're not licensed properly. There's a lot of bad things that can happen by just utilizing these tools. And so knowing, what that shadow AI is, that shadow IT, is a huge challenge for people. And so, getting your arms around it, we call it the visibility AI issue, but having visibility into what's happening in your organization is front and center. Man, it's amazing to me how many CISOs, the majority I think are involved, but how many are not involved? It's like, well, I'm not, they didn't put me on the AI committee, or we have a new AI chief. We have an AI chief AI officer, or a chief AI fill in the blank, or AI this or AI that, creating their own total new organization. It's like, this is separate from IT in some areas. That's going to be dangerous if the CISO isn't involved in that. So that goes back to the discussion we had earlier about influence, making sure you're involved. Are you involved in the right meetings? I mean, one of the things I learned, people would say to me, Dan, the no issue I was talking about earlier, oh, you guys always said no. People said, well, fine, we're just not going to invite you to the important meetings. So there were all these different projects, $100 million new, CGIS system, state police system, another $200 million new tax system, new Salesforce system, new this, new that. We weren't even involved in those meetings. And so it took peeling back layers of the onion as the CISO to make sure that we were involved in the right meetings and the right discussions, and that in fact, that we had that visibility in what was going on.
Yeah, yeah, this is so crucial. And going back to your topic, when you were saying that so many people use free AI tools, at the end of the day, what is this saying, that if you don't pay for the product, then you are the product?
Exactly right.
Yeah, and today it becomes so crucial to actually have people integrated in all the process, as especially as you said, AI driven processes, because if you don't know what's going on inside, then you might be, as you said, it used to take weeks, now it takes days to actually get affected by all of the things that this technology enables.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I can't help but notice, you use so much of a storytelling approach, and it actually makes it so much easier to understand more difficult concepts and directions and strategic decisions. Um, how can it translate to practice for someone who wants to adopt a similar approach? Any advice for our CISO listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned, I do a lot of public speaking, and writing helps too. I encourage you, depending on what your organization allows or doesn't allow, to be involved and get out and be a positive advocate for cybersecurity, both in your community and your organization and your industry that you're involved in. As you do that, people, you go, many of us people watching this, they go to so many conferences and you see so many jargons and so many policies and procedures and laws and technologies, and that's not, I'm not saying that's not important, but what really impacts people is when they hear a story, it makes it real for them, and it's much more memorable. Maybe you'll remember that from this whole presentation. Maybe you'll remember the Wi-Fi story I started with. I mean, the reality is that's what people remember weeks, months, years later. And so, I think it's true with our staff being open, having integrity, being honest about it. I mean, obviously, not every story can be told in every venue. Some things have to stay confidential. So make sure you have the authority to tell the story you're telling. But the reality is that storytelling builds trust. And at the end of the day, I would just say the CISO has to be the chief trust officer. If they don't trust you, they're not going to come to you. You want them, your clients, you want your business areas to say, I want to know what Dan Lohrmann's opinion is on that. I want to know, and whether it's on security or AI or new technology or the cloud or transformations or business process reengineering or whatever terminology you want to use, you need to be in the room, and you need to be a trusted partner. And so if you're not that, then you're not really making an impact. And I think stories, true stories, used in the right situations. I can be long-winded. You probably already figured that out. So I got to sometimes be more crisp. But telling a good story in a meaningful situation that is relevant and that is impactful, and then what you learn from that really does impact your staff and your management, whether you're talking up to the board, whether you're talking down to your staff or below, people below, not down to them, but I mean, people who work for you, or your peers, or, the vendor community. It really helps build trust.
Yeah, yeah. And I think another story that really stood out to me when we spoke last time is that there have been at least 10 CISOs, along with several top leaders, who came out of the team you built in Michigan. It's such an amazing legacy. What was sort of the secret sauce that you used to produce so many amazing security leaders?
Well, it's been a blessing. I really thank God for that. I'll tell you, um, a lot of it has been the culture and the people who I've been fortunate to work for, who really encourage open, honest communication, excellence, really making sure that people are given the tools that they need to get the job done, and do it in a way as a leader that people want to follow and learn from. And it can build on itself. I mean, we see this with sports teams. We see this in a lot of areas of life, that, the best musicians, the best organizations that are known for music or sports or drama, whatever it might be, and technology, they go to those organizations because again and again and again, they have a culture where they're able to contribute and make a difference. And I've been very blessed to have that around us. And it got to the point where people sought us out. People from around the country came, and Chris DeRusha came from Washington, wanted to become the CISO in Michigan. He did after me, and then he went on to become, worked in the White House as CISO for all federal government. He we was on the Biden for president team, became the chief security officer for President Biden. Those kinds of things happen. And again, not Democrat or Republican here. I've had Republican stories the same. But being open, I made mistakes along the way. Another one is Mike Monticello. Read the story about him. I didn't want him to. I was like, early in my career, I made some mistakes. I didn't want students. We're not having students. He kept coming back. He was persistent. He was dogmatic. I want to work for this team. He wanted we call it the Bat Cave, which was our security operations center at the time. We called it the Bat Cave. And but he kept coming back. I'm glad I did hire him. He was persistent. He was successful. Went on to run cybersecurity for IBM North America. Worked for Oracle. Worked for Walmart. A world leader right now in cybersecurity. So, I mean, we've had people stories like that, and some of them they're all individual stories, but it really is a bigger story of culture and excellence. And just been very, very fortunate to be a part of that.
Yeah. Back to the beginning of our podcast when you really emphasized the network, and as you said, if I mentioned it 50 times, that's probably not enough, and that's something that has to be emphasized throughout every CISO's career, because this is not the kind of field where you grow in isolation. Right. This is such a sensitive area where all the learnings, whether through stories or anything, have to be shared, and this community is something that really drives for more amazing leaders to be built in the future. We have this little tradition done on our podcast where typically our last guest will ask a question to our next guest.
Yep.
So our previous guest asked you the following question. So when it comes to cybersecurity, there are different ways to approach it. You can look at it as more of a broad area, and the way you look at it as a more centralized way of approaching it, or more distributed. What is your way of looking into cybersecurity? What is Dan's sort of correct way of looking into it?
Yeah, the organizations I've been a part of, and certainly in state governments and big cities, counties, and to some extent the federal government, I'm an advocate for centralization within the span of the control of that organization. So certainly centralized. In Michigan, we brought all the different agencies had their own security teams. We brought them together, created one team. We did more with less. We were more efficient, but we were also able to do leverage skill sets and capabilities across the enterprise. It was very, very successful. And I think Michigan set a model for that. When I was CISO there, a lot of other states followed in our footsteps. And I think certainly in my experience, centralized IT, IT management overall, but certainly cybersecurity is the most successful governance model. Now, not to say you can't be successful in a decentralized or a hybrid model. That's a whole other discussion for another day. But I would advocate for centralized cybersecurity governance.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And what question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and I it's kind of two parts, but really it's one question: is what excites you about the future of cybersecurity, and then what gives you hope? It can be, as you mentioned, it can be a very depressing thing. I mean, you've got to be an optimist because they're going to have pretty pessimistic days, right? You got to plow through and work through these tough challenges we keep facing, and it's constantly accelerating and changing all around us each and every day. No doubt it'll be different 5 years from now, 2 years from now than it is today. So it's constantly changing. What gives you hope? What excites you about the future of cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's very future-looking questions and amazing questions, because as we start the year, I'm sure a lot of people create their resolutions and the way they approach the personal life, professional life. But hope is something that drives a lot of people, and it will be exciting to see how CISO role evolves in the future.
Correct.
Then, It's been amazing conversation. I think the word that really sticks out to me when I spoke to you is constant learning. Whether it's when you just joined this field and you started in so many interesting organizations, so many places that people dream of working in, and at the same time, you kept that humble attitude towards learning and educating others via stories, whether it was writing a book or just speaking publicly and teaching about your experience and being very honest about it, even if you were against the Wi Fi at the very start. But the very end, it's all about how we stay relevant to today's threats, and that's where your project of creating that report really comes in, where that's a consistent effort that has to be in place for everyone to learn about these threats and also to respond to them in the future. So the word for this podcast is consistent learning and stick to the stories. And it's such a pleasure to have you here with us, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I didn't even say Presidio, my current job, but I'm very thankful for my current role as a field CISO with Presidio because it gives me the chance to talk to CISOs all over the world and help them with best practices. So I appreciate you highlighting my career, and I wish you all the best. Thank you, and have a great 2026.
Thank you. Thank you.